Hello and welcome to week 2 of Critical and Complex Issues in Leadership. I'm your professor, Dr. David Favela. Before we begin, and I forgot to do this in the welcome video and in week 1, but let's say a quick prayer. Dear Jesus, thank you so much for all that you give us. Be with us as we learn, be with us as we try to become the best leaders possible, and continue to guide us in honoring your Father, our God, number 1. Amen. How awesome is that, right? I love doing that. So week two, and hopefully you've sort of been working on your weekly briefs. I know it seems like a lot, but I promise you it's really going to help you with your writing, creating those short sentences, very concise and precise writing. If you've looked at the instructions, I'm sure you're probably like, wow, there's a lot. But I created that because I wanted to be able to give you things to think about: conceptual extractions, integrations of the empirical and theoretical sources, critical analysis, applied leadership diagnosis, the frameworks. There's a lot there. It gives you a lot of things to sort of function, use in order to help you with your writing. And then don't forget to do your weekly discussion board, which this one's really cool this week. It's one of my favorite. Hope you enjoy it. And then the other thing is the framing question, right? So what is the framing question? Here it is. How do different levels of organizational change, individual, group, or system, create misalignment, and when does that misalignment escalate from a manageable issue to a critical leadership problem? Okay, so let me give you a story. So when I was at a professional school, I worked at a medical school. The school was just opening, and there were many different levels of organizational change. I mean, it happened sometimes daily, monthly. I mean, sometimes I remember sort of rewriting my job description every year until I left that position. And how it created a misalignment. Well, first of all, they didn't really know what we were going to do. My job was outcomes assessment, looking at data, creating exams that sort of mirrored the licensing exam, vetting, looking at psychometrically sound points. Basically, what psychometrically means is just cover up the answer to make sure it's testing logic, not trickery, right? So no negatives in the stems. We want to make sure everything's vetted. Curriculum mapping, lecture objective mapping, course objective mapping. I mean, all these things, right? And you're probably like, wow, that sounds really boring. It actually isn't very boring. What it is, though, is sort of like a map, right? That's what curriculum mapping is how do we go from instructor learning to student receiving that information, and how does that tie on to the accreditation and then on to preparing them for the licensing exam, right? So at first, when they first told me about the job, I thought it was more like TEKS sort of mapping, like this lecture objective defeats this, and in rudimentary, it sort of is that, but it becomes more complex as you're involving a 7-hour anatomy course, 4-hour virology course. It becomes more complex. So when they were trying to explain this to me at the beginning, it was very hard to understand, well, who's writing the questions? And it was like the faculty. Okay. We had some faculty who were clinical partners. They had no idea. They've never taught before. They didn't even know how to write an exam. That was a difficult change. Then we had some faculty who were very much well known in the medical field. They didn't want anyone touching their lectures, touching their questions. You can imagine how that's a problem, right? The other problem was the senior associate dean didn't really explain this in depth to the faculty. He sort of acknowledged the faculty like, hey, you're going to have to send it to this office. They're just going to check it, and that's it. Then it became more complicated than that. It was no more just checking. It was more like editing, reviewing, making sure that the questions were fitting those psychometrically sound, principles. And then faculty either rebelled or they accepted everything. And then it got to the point where faculty didn't know why they were having to send questions. So there was a breakdown in communication. And then it became where a lot of the senior faculty were very upset that we were sort of questioning them on their questions. And that hurts a little bit, right? That's a sense of pride. And people don't take very kindly to being questioned on how they test or their methodology for testing. And so what happened was that the senior associate dean wanted us to go around and explain this. So we actually had this full presentation about this. And after the presentation was over, it did not go very well. In fact, the faculty, a lot of them, either refused to send questions or they did refuse to acknowledge our emails. And then at that point, some of the faculty had gone to the dean to see if they could remove our office because they thought they sort of saw our office as a high hurdle. And so then it was like, well, how do we fix this? Because it went for something as simple as like, we're just here to look at questions. We all want to make this together. We want what's best for our students to, okay, now we're involving the dean. Now we're going to involve the provost. We got to figure out why these people are doing what they're doing. And there was a lot of miscommunication, but it became a critical, complex issue in leadership. I mean, for a moment there, faculty were not very happy with our office. They wouldn't even talk to us. They wouldn't even come see us. And then eventually there was some buy-in, right? We had to get some of the senior faculty, some of the assistant deans to sort of, you know what, these guys are good. They know what they're doing. They're helping us. Things are better. Questions are better. Exams are better. Students are being tested. They know more in the clinical side of it. You know, things are getting better, but it took some time. And unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, right? I think the one thing that I can say about that is that it went from something as simple as just like, hey, we're all in this together, to a quarry between the faculty and us in the staff department. And so those things happen, right? Luckily, everything ended up working out. A lot of the faculty that sort of tried to rebel against the senior associate dean didn't work out. Everyone sort of fell in line once they knew this is why we're doing this. And it's always important to know your whys. So with that being said, sort of think about that when you're looking at your question, right? And make sure you find that literature to support your thoughts. So take care, and we'll see you next time.